And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you came back because you wanted more. Folks, that was a brilliant decision because we have a lot more for you. Why do we have so much for you? Because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And you cracked the code. Our guest today is, in fact, a podcaster. Folks, you're brilliant. I'm so glad you're here with me today. This is the place where we all come together to raise each other up, and this is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. Folks, thank you for being here. Without waiting any longer, let's bring in our guest today and get sailing. He is an expert, or soon to be, or wanting to be, expert in political polarization, media literacy, and the host of the awesome podcast. I've listened to it. I love it. Outrage Overload, staying grounded through science and balanced perspectives. Please welcome David Beckemeyer. David, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here, Rory. Rory, really love it.
Oh, I
I love what
appreciate
you're
you coming
doing with
on.
the show.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I appreciate you coming on, being a part of it. I love your topic. I love what you're doing. I admire it. I can't even imagine what it's like to be as calm as you are through the whole thing, but I love every minute of it. I can't wait to dig into this. Before we do, let me just kind of ask you, hey, who is David Beckmeyer? What are you about? Give everybody an idea of who this is that's talking to him today.
Yeah, so taking the podcast leap was a pretty big leap for me because I basically was a tech guy for many years. That was kind of the industry I was in. Started off as kind of a developer and worked my way into tech management, tech executive, Silicon Valley companies as an executive, and then ultimately as a tech investor. And retired from that a few years ago. And wasn't really looking for something like this to do, but we live in an environment where things are pretty heated up, and there's kind of a lot going on, a lot of family members, kind of disowning each other and things like this, and all this kind of crazy stuff. So, all that seemed to be on my mind and happening around me, and happening to me to some degree, right? So then that kind of got me thinking, what's going on there, and that's how I kind of like I say, we can go down this other path, but that's what kind of started me down the idea of a podcast. It was like, am I going to do a blog? Am I going to do a vlog? Am I going to do, what's happening? What might make sense? And it seemed like a podcast was a good format or style because you could kind of drill down and go deeper than kind of a 2 minute soundbite on TV or whatever. So you can actually, kind of drill down and go a little deeper. And I'm kind of a science nerd, so for me, it was like an opportunity to also kind of get a chance to talk to some of these world class scientists that are kind of looking at these problems. So, and that's kind of my audience too. I think it's a little bit science nerdy, right? They kind of may not be scientists or academics, but they kind of are a little bit of a science nerd or a political junkie or something like that, and want to kind of understand some of it more. So for me, it was a big leap, right? Because in the space I was in before, many decades as a tech exec, and kind of having a reputation in that world, I'm jumping into this world where I'm basically nobody. I'm not saying I'm anybody now, but certainly on day one, I was even less of a nobody. And going in there as just with no real background. I actually started taking journalism classes online with Michigan State, go Spartans, um, which is great, by the way. There's all these opportunities out there for us to continue to learn. Um, and so, yeah, I'm coming out of nowhere with this, and jumping into a space where I'm, don't really have much knowledge about. I'm a tech guy, so I kind of know the tech part of it somewhat, and I've done some stuff with audio and music and things before, so I knew a little bit about some of the tools and some of that side of the technology. But when you get into, you know, how do you create a show? What's the beginning? What's the end? What's the middle? What's an audience? How does that work? That was all new to me. So, in some sense, maybe there was a piece of that was like the adventure, right? I can go into this new space where I get to learn all these new things that I don't know anything about. Whereas before, maybe I was a little bored being in that same space for all those years in tech and in tech investing and all that stuff. And I think it kind of started to feel like it was the same all the time. So podcasting was an opportunity to jump into the deep end of a completely different world.
I love that. I mean, it's a creative outlet for sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You you talk about what got you into doing this particular type of podcast, and this one in particular. The i- there is a ton of outrage in the world. There is a ton of conflict in the world. We all know this. Did some of this hit you personally in some way that it kind of drove you to say, "Hey, I need to do something about this"? Because it doesn't seem like a casual endeavor.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, you just have, like I was saying, how we all are kind of living in this world. So we're all kind of seeing it and experiencing it around us in some degree or another. Seems like almost everybody has a story like Uncle John's not invited to Thanksgiving anymore, kind of stuff, right? Seems like everybody has a story like that, or I can't talk to my brother-in-law or something like that. So there's that those kind of stories existed in my life as well as just like I say, everybody seems to have those stories. Um, and then, but there was some, other things that were like specific family members, having different conversations and things happening, and then and for my case personally, so that hit some people that are really close to me, and I thought, wow, okay, that's like kind of a shock. That, like, for instance, my son got off social media. He's a millennial, and you're like, they're usually pretty into this kind of stuff, and, all of a sudden he's off social media. I'm like, what's that about? And we kind of had some conversations about that, and it kind of turned into that he was getting into these political debates and finding it like there's no win, like you don't win doing that. So, and he kind of learned that. And for me it was like that too. Like, so I was getting in Twitter fights. I was a guy out there getting in Twitter fights with people, like, and then all that just added up at some point. Like, what are we doing? Like, what is happening here? And then that seemed to kind of trigger that kind of nerdy scientist kind of part of my brain. Like, there's probably more to this story. There's probably more behind all this, right? And that's what got me thinking about, well, yeah, there's a lot of neuroscience, there's a lot of psychology and social science. And then I also, in that journey, I figured out but I'm not the only one who knows about this or thinks about this. And so there's a bunch of scientific work being done in this space. And that got me thinking, well, this is great. I can bring that scientific literature and some of the cutting edge stuff people are looking at to kind of a more, you don't have to know the math. You don't have to read the paper. Like, I'll read the paper. I'll break it down, and then we'll just cover it in a way that is more interesting, and in a 30-minute show, 30 to 45-minute show, where you don't have to be like super nerdy, or you don't have to know the math. And we'll talk about what is this about in kind of layman's terms, but a little geeky. If you're a little sciencey, we might cover a few sciencey kind of things and some sciencey terminology, but you don't have to be like hardcore scientists to understand what we're talking about, and try to bring it into a perspective of like how it affects real people. Like, how is it, what do we do with this? So that's what I thought was a big opportunity there. And a lot of these scientists and researchers, they're not going on MSNBC or Fox News that often. Some are. I've had some folks that go on that kind of stuff, but for a lot of this work, it's kind of out there and people don't know about it. So this is an opportunity to maybe expose more of that work and what is happening, maybe create a little more optimism. Like, there are really smart people looking at these problems, and that is another category of guests that I have, what I call practitioners. So these are sort of folks that are running organizations or doing other work like that in this space, where they're kind of doing bridge building. They call it kind of bridge building is one of the terms, or depolarization is another one, where they're trying to either doing kind of dialogue kind of stuff, coaching people on how to have conversations and teaching people how to have conversations, or they're doing other things. Like, some people are working in social media that we know is like a problem, but they're working on improvements of social media and algorithms and things like that. So there's a lot of work going on that a lot of us don't know about. So I also talked to a lot of these practitioners that, I think Peter Coleman, one of the experts in this space, have identified like 8,000 organizations working in this stuff. My show is part of a coalition called the Listen First Coalition, and there's over 500 organizations in that group, all people passionate about this subject, trying to lower the temperature, basically.
Okay, the entire topic is fascinating to me, because you refer to the outrage industry, in that this is the purpose of everybody. It doesn't even matter which side of the aisle you're on. The whole idea is just to get you so mad that you only hear your side, of the story, right? You stay in your echo chamber, and then you're influenced that way. But one of the questions you bring up is, who wins in that? So I guess, in your opinion, and with the research you've done and the study you've done, what is the point of getting us all that angry?
Yeah, there's incentives. There are sort of provocateurs that only exist to leverage that. Like, they have that's their shtick on their maybe their podcast or their YouTube channel or their TV show, and that's what they do. There's that, but there's also like a bigger, like, structural components of this, right? For this is a shift that's been happening for like 50 years. It didn't all of a sudden happen, but it's been escalating more and more. This idea of polarization, where we um, have separated into groups, into ideological silos a bit more, right? So it used to be there were more conservative Democrats and there were more liberal Republicans, and we've all kind of sorted and stuck ourselves now in these groups that now have selected this set of issues that kind of keep them this idea of polarized. They're different. They're like on a different place in the spectrum. So there's that happening, and so then by doing that, there's another part of another kind of polarization that is it generally is called we call it affective polarization. So this is more about feelings and how we feel about the other side, and so we are really bitterly divided, right? We really dislike people on the other side, right? And it's not even about the issues often, right? It's just more about those people are dangerous and scary and literally like we think they're sort of bad morals and they have bad intent. And there are people that so that has there if you think of politicians, this is good. This is a model that kind of works for them. Like there are incentives for them to use that because it's easier for me to just keep telling you the other side is terrible than it is for me to come up with a policy and do something, right? It's way easier to message that. And if you find yourself subscribed to some of these emails or text messages or wherever else, you'll see that most of these messages start off with something scary, right? This other side did this thing. So $75, right? This other person's terrible, $75. So that's like they've fallen into this is they like it because it's easier for them, right? They can just have this simple message. I'm just going to mostly talk about how the other side is bad. And we kind of buy into it. So, I mean, we are part of the problem and that's why we talk about it a lot on the shows. It's not like there's anything wrong with this. Like this is human psychology. And all of these players have kind of learned how to use that psychology. And so if you look at social media for instance here is, you know, most people think there wasn't like a Mr. Burns in a tower somewhere going, let's create the system that divides people the most. And this will make social media. But it happened as sort of an accident because of they're driven by attention and engagement. So just by having an algorithm that rewards engagement, because humans are humans and it's the way our brain works, we interact with that stuff, right? So now that's what filters to the top, these things that enrage us or scare us, right? These emotions are really powerful. It's what social media companies have accidentally figured out, that's what keeps people on the platform. That's what keeps people engaged. That's what people respond to. That's what, so now there's all these incentives for the actors on these platforms that create that content. They get promoted and boosted, right? So that content kind of goes to the top. And and so this is another example of this sort of systemic problem that we kind of have this another place where it gets amplified. This kind of worst case worst case conversation gets amplified, and a bad thing about all that is that so that's who wins. If you ask like who wins, that these are the players who win. You have politicians who win. You have these media creators. So it happens on TV too. Like I said, there are various almost all of this news anymore. Like there isn't that much news. Like all these programs that call themselves news, they're mostly entertainment shows
Right.
now, and so it's the same thing. They're competing for eyeballs. They're competing for clicks. They're competing for, our attention. And so what gets our attention? Well, get us mad, like get us scared. These are the things that get us engaged. So all these players have these incentives to do it. And again, we're part of the problem because we keep clicking it. We keep wanting more of it. And so that's kind of who wins and why it exists this way. Because there are some people that just like, they're just trolls and they just like rallying people up. But more of it is this larger, kind of it works for people. Like I win in this model. Like I get ahead. I get elected. I get more money through my clicks. My channel gets more views and all that kind of stuff, right?
Interesting. Interesting. It's for some reason, even when I was listening to your podcast, I kept thinking of that what is it, that meme or that thing going around Facebook where you put the red ants and the black ants in the jar
Right.
and they coexist just fine until you shake the jar up and then they eat each other.
100%. Yeah. And I don't know
Right.
if that's a true thing. Like, I don't know if the science behind that is true, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
great illustration, but that's exactly what it seems like is just going on all the time on
Right.
both sides.
Yeah.
Um, Now,
Oh yeah, no one has a
yeah,
no. Neither side has a monopoly on this, right? This is
no,
happening on all sides. They may have different approaches to it that may have different appearance to it, right? Some are kind of more yelling and screaming, and some are kind of more analytical and seem, very polished and nice arguments. But they're kind of doing the same thing. They're trying to make you scared and trying to highlight how the other side is kind of, almost ludicrous in how bad they are.
right. One thing that I've seen is that each side absolutely believes that the other side is uh, crazy, is wrong, is morally wrong, and that they're ignorant, that they just don't know all the facts. And then even when facts are presented one way or the other, they go, "Oh, well, that was fabricated, or that's AI, or that's made up." And no one ever
It's the
says, "Well,
wrong facts. Yeah.
it's, neither side ever says, but wait a minute, what if all the stuff I saw was made up?"
Right.
You know? So given that fact, I mean, the idea that there's some way to get past that is brave. I mean, it's revolutionary. So
Right.
where do you start to chip away at that kind of resistance?
Right, and it is really hard. I mean, I mentioned so many organizations and people working on this, and really smart people putting all kind of research into this. But yeah, it's definitely a hard problem. And for many of us, I've been doing it a couple of years. Some people have been doing it for decades. It can be a sort of be a difficult place to work because you don't feel like that much is changing, right? Or maybe even things are getting worse, right? So it can be difficult. But like I say, there are a lot of things, and one of the biggest things, many things show promise, and the big challenge is now how to scale them, right? And so that's, I think, where a lot of the energy is put. If we can figure out the things that scale, a lot of people talk about this in using different kinds of language. This idea that we spiraled down, we spiraled to where we are, if we can somehow reverse some of those mechanics, we can spiral back up and we can spiral out of this, right? We can kind of create, a viral thing that goes in the other direction. Instead of sort of spiraling down, we spiral up. And I think this is where there's a lot of work being done. And how can we do some of these things? Because there are many things that show promise. I mean, some are just lowering, like you mentioned about how we believed all these things about the other side. Um, One thing is kind of helping, you know, um, soften those perceptions or show how wrong those perceptions are, right? And it's hard to scale. All these things, like I said, are hard to scale. But when you can show that, for the most part, we overthink the other person hates us more than they really do. We think they're, dumber than they really are. We think they're, brainwashed more than they really are. We think they have these bad intentions more than they really do. So when you can lower those perceptions, which are off by a lot, like factors of 2 or 3 or 10, depending, in some of these categories, like how, particularly one of the big ones is how interested is that would that person, how supportive of that person on the other side would be of something like violence, like getting really extreme, and we overestimate that by a huge amount. Like we really think the other person's ready to get violent, and that they're not typically any more ready to get violent than you are, right? But we see that, we believe it, so it scares us and we think about it. So that's one avenue, is finding ways to maybe lower some of these perception, they call it the perception gap, reducing that perception gap a little bit more reasonable. Like, okay, yeah, they think they see things differently, but like they still have kids in school, like they care about potholes in the road, and they care about a bunch of the same things that we care about, right? They're just regular people trying to get along just like you. And when you can lower those perceptions, that can help a lot. um, but yeah, but other things are finding ways to get people to get there to do that, right? I mean, we've lost. I don't know if you like Putnam and the bowling alone idea, that we've sort of segmented off in so many ways, geographically, all these other ways, and we're not doing much community stuff anymore. And we're trying to substitute community with like online things, and it's not good. It's like not as effective. Like, you need to, so the more we can do that, like if we can somehow promote community, we've lost a lot of the like local news and things like that. So we're focused so much on these national issues because it's way cheaper to have the same news go all over the country. So then they just focus on these national items. So now suddenly these national issues have become way more salient in our lives than they should be. Like we can have a lot more impact, and we might be more impacted by stuff happening in our community, at town halls and school boards and stuff like that. And if we knew more about some of those things, we might not be so stressed out about what's happening in Washington that may not affect us for who knows how long, if ever. These kind of, and we can't do much about what happens in Washington anyway, so it just causes us to get more stressed out. So if we focused more locally, that we know that's also something that can really soften some of these hostile attitudes we have towards each other. So we can do more of that. Like if you get to know your neighbors, you still might not. I'm not saying we're going to necessarily all agree or anything like that. We're no, and this is never about agreement. It's more about coexistence, right? It's like realizing democracy's messy. It's kind of supposed to be messy. You don't always get your way, but we don't like it's not dooms like it's not everything is sort of cataclysmic or existential, right? And that's the place we have in our heads now that we think everything is existential.
Yeah.
And it's a spiral that starts to be that way, that things become more existential because we get so much concerned about what the other side's going to do. We're more and more willing to take on these more extreme ideas.
I mean, even as recent as 20 years ago, you could just agree to disagree, not talk about it, and then go have a beer. And it wasn't a big deal. Now, if you disagree with somebody on these types of things, you absolutely can't go have a beer with these people because they're just not good people. And
Right.
how we change that badly in 20 years? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, like we say, it's been a long process, but yeah, certainly over the last 20 years, it has accelerated even more. Um, yeah, and it's a big challenge that we have made this so salient in our lives. We've made your political identity like 25 years ago, something like that. Like you say, 20 years ago, our political identity wasn't quite like the first thing that how you identified somebody, right? It might be the third thing or something like that, right? You thought of them maybe as what church they went to or what school they went to or what, something like that. There'd be these other aspects of them. But now it's like we're so anxious to know where they stand on this political issue. And then once they say that one thing, okay, now I'm going to put them in this bucket and they're going to be in that bucket. Even and this is another misperception that we think anybody who believes thing A also believes the other 17 things that maybe go with that, right? And it's
Right.
not true. Like we know statistically the data shows that most of us have some cross-cutting ideas, right? We're not 100% in alignment with either of these two major camps, right? And so we had this misperception that somebody is also just instantly believes all these things. And then you take that further and say that also implies then they have bad moral judgment. And then that's when it gets I can't go have a beer with them because I believe they have, some moral flaw that would be like break a principle of mine. And that's where we have to unravel that more. I mean, that could exist, like that person exists. I'm not going to say they don't, but it's like a tiny percentage compared to the way we just carve it up 50-50, that we think 50% of the country is morally bad and I can't go have a beer with them.
Exactly. 100%. You and I, in this same vein, you and I talked about, the assassination attempt, during the election, and that type of thing. And the only reason I'm bringing it up now is because in the couple minutes before the podcast, we both were like, yeah, that was one of those almost 9/11 moments where everybody said, hey, let's stop fighting. Let's bring down the outrage a little bit. And during 9/11, you're probably old enough to remember that, but, I know I am for sure. It lasted for a little while. I mean, there was a period of we're not trying to attack everybody and accuse everybody of, everything you accuse people of. But with the assassination attempt, it lasted like what, 2 days, and then everybody was right back at each other's throats. So I mean, it was like bring down the temp until tomorrow. So I just wonder if there's um, when you're talking to people about bringing down the temperature, one of the things that I hear back, and I'd love to hear how you guys in your organizations handle this sort of thing, is, well, why should I? Because if I do and they don't, well, now I'm losing, to them. And if they're not gonna, then why should I? Where do you start? How do you dig into that?
Yeah. No, it's definitely there was a recent study came out. It's called like this connection opportunity, which talks about a lot of the things we've talked about how people do want to connect more, but they're one of the issues is exactly what you're describing, right? Like I'm afraid that if I go first, I'm going to sort of be vulnerable in some way, and potentially that could sort of backfire, and somehow I'll end up in this place I don't want to be. Because many people have been traumatized by these conversations, right? So that creates fear that they're worried about going into them because it's happened before that they sort of gotten traumatized in some way by, and they've somehow gotten traumatized by that experience. So yeah, I mean, and there is some of that, right? So I mean, again, it's there's a lot of organizations that try to teach you a little bit about how to do this a little bit, but in a simple way, because it's really hard to do. Like you have all this stuff, you said all these things intellectually, this is how I'm going to handle it, and then you actually get there and your emotions fire up and you kind of spiral out. But one of the best ways to think about this is, what do I really have to lose, though? Because I don't, just because I listen to them doesn't mean I have to change my mind, right? Like somehow we have a hard time holding on to those two things. Like, I can hear them and maybe even understand more about why they think what they think, but I can still believe what I believe. Like, I might change my mind, but I don't have to change my mind. Like, I can my opinion on this is safe. Like, it can stay there if that's what you want, right? So that's one thing people are afraid of, I think, a little bit. Like, oh, they might change my mind or tell me something different. Well, in some sense, that's probably okay. But if you don't have to. Like, you can listen and understand more about what they're saying, and not fall, not give up your position if you feel something really important. And I think that's one problem, is we have a hard time holding on to those two things. And what I like to think about when we're having those conversations is try to find a way that it's a little bit more of a win-win. So instead of I'm going to convince you to think my way, and if I don't achieve that, it's a loss. If you can go into it and say, let's create a shared objective, and that shared objective is, let's something like, let's like become detectives, and let's try to understand why we see this differently, and then we can both win in that. And again, you don't have to change our minds. We can hold on to what we believe, but we might understand more about why the other person thinks what they think. And and so sometimes if you can create that shared goal, that shared purpose, and it's no longer a win lose, it's no longer a battle of who's going to win this argument. It's more a battle of it's more a goal of, can I understand more? And so I leave that conversation understanding more. And it's hard to do that because we really do want this person to think like we think, right? Like, it's really hard not to do that. But if you can put yourself there, that'll help a lot. And so that's one kind of relatively simple thing you can try to do. But again, it can be hard in the moment. It can be hard to really do. And I do recommend, if you have these kind of conversations, the more physical. It's like, if you can go for a walk and do it, we know just the way our bodies and brains work. If you're moving together, there's a certain community, there's a certain connection there that doesn't happen when you're sort of sitting across a table. So moving together in the same direction physically, it can actually help you a little bit move together, sort of metaphorically. So walking and talking is a good thing if you can do that when you have these kind of conversations.
Well, go
But
ahead.
yeah, so it can be scary to jump in and you feel like you're vulnerable, right? It does happen. But if you go into it knowing, what do I have to lose, really? Like, they can't change my mind. Only I can change my mind, right? So you don't really have anything to lose.
Nice. I appreciate that. As you do your podcast here, what exactly is the purpose of the podcast?
Yeah. So ultimately, what like if I could, and I get this, so I it already kind of is that, but I just want to keep it growing. But uh, you know, if two people, come to me and say, "Hey, because of your show, I was able to handle, this political thing that happened, like somebody getting elected I didn't want to get elected, or some issue got passed that I didn't want to get passed, and I was able to, like, realize maybe that's not the end of the world, or we can go somewhere beyond that. I was able to handle that better. That's a win for me, right? And I've had a lot more than two people say those kinds of things to me, but what a lot of it is about, just kind of building some resilience for these realities. And I think another one is, just this, and that's the deep ultimate one, but that's often created by some of these other things, like beginning to realize that maybe that idea I thought was like the worst possible thing, there's a little bit more detail to that. So that's another piece of what we're trying to do, is teach that the world is a little more complex than you might think it was. And most of the time, there's probably more to a lot of these stories because, we're humans. What we like to do, we only have so much brain cognitive load. Like we're busy with a lot of stuff going on. I don't want to go into all this nuance, right? It's a lot. Let me put it in a bucket and set it aside. Now it doesn't take any more mental energy to think about it. And the problem is usually once we've done that, we oversimplified it. Like we left a bunch of stuff out when we put it in that bucket. And so that's another piece. It's just understanding that most things are probably more complex than you think they are, and there's probably more to that story. And especially something you said, I think either before we recorded or right at the beginning, that we spend so much energy thinking about how the other side has things wrong and their facts aren't good and they've got the misinformation. And we should really, if I can get someone to say, you know what, I'm spending 20% less time worrying about what the other side is looking at and looking more about what my side and myself is looking at. I think that's a biggie. Like, we just spend so much time. It's easy to find. Like if I tell you, give me three things that's, sort of really bad about this political rival, you're going to have those right off the top of your head, right? But if I say, give me three things about what your side has done wrong or, some ideas that you think aren't good, it's going to be harder to find those three. You probably find them, but it might take a little bit more work. But those three on the other side, you got them. They're right at the forefront of your brain, right? But that's a big one, is spend more energy on your side and on thinking about, like, because your side is doing this outrage industry, these outrage tactics to you, right? They're doing them to me, they're doing them to all of us. And so your side is doing it. Like if whatever side you're on, you listen to their program or you watch their show and you left matter. I almost guarantee it. You left matter at the other side,
Yep.
whether they were sort of using the screaming style or whether they were using kind of the intellectual style, right? The calm voice, very polished, seems very all factual and good data, but they left you matter. So that you got more angry or more scared. And so your side is doing it. So that's a big piece too, that helping people have that lens that if you're going to dive into this media, just remember that there's that lens. Your side is trying to get you scared and afraid and angry. And just have that lens like, oh, they're doing the thing. Oh, I see. They're doing the thing to me right now. They're trying to make me more angry. And that's usually an indicator to say there's probably more to that story, because whatever side you're on and whatever news sources you're using, they may be telling you bald-faced lies. That happens. More often than not, though, they're just leaving some parts out that might have changed, that might have created a little more nuance to that story. It might have softened a little. It's like, oh, it wasn't quite as bad as I really, once you look into it, oh, it wasn't really quite as bad as the way they presented it, because really there was these other three little factors that they left out. Yeah. So whichever side you're listening, that kind of thing is happening because they're trying to create a narrative that makes it as scary as they possibly can. And so just kind of know that's happening, even when especially when you're listening to the stuff that you like because the problem with when we like it, another piece about how our brain works and how epistemology works and all that is we don't question it because it makes so much sense. Like we already know it makes sense. So why should I question it? Right. Because it just makes too much sense. And that's when you have to be kind of proactive or active to really say, oh, wait, it makes too much sense. That's probably a good reason why I need to look into it a little more, because it's too easy to accept. If it's too good to be true, there's probably a little bit more of that story. So that's really what the podcast is trying to do. And, and I think when it comes to the getting more into like the podcasting side of it, I have to create a show, and that episode 3 that you talked about of the Outrage on the Mic, the series finale of that Outrage on the Mic series you mentioned you listened to, the 3rd episode there was kind of about that, right? That it was kind of about this idea that here I am trying to create a podcast and grow it without using those techniques, right? Without, marketers tell you create, literally they use the word polarization, right? Come up with a polarizing theme and get people kind of, whether it's angry or something else, but get them to sort of plant a flag and fight over that theme. And my show's trying to do the exact opposite, right? So I'm trying to tell you about nuance and trying to tell you that it's more complicated than it is and things like that. So, and I've still got to somehow grow with that, right? And create that without, I don't necessarily have the viral incentives and all that, because my stuff is not trying to, get people riled up. It's trying to do the opposite, right? So it's an interesting world to live in, to try to, grow a show and create an audience around that. And it's, it's been interesting to see that, like, the audience takes a while for the audience to get it, because like at first they're like, I thought he was going to tell me all the reasons to be mad, at media, which I do sometimes a little bit, tell you reasons to be mad at media, but that's like not the main thing that, we're not just doing that, just trying to get you mad at media, because we're part of it. Like, you can't just blame the media. Like, we're part of this problem, right? So anyway, stuff like that. So trying to do a show that isn't using those techniques when, for many shows, I think your show isn't trying to do that, but many shows are, right? That's their whole thing. Like, I've got a show and I'm gonna plant a flag, and I'm gonna have a bunch of people that disagree with me, and that's part of my show.
Sure, sure. I, I love what you're saying. In terms of the show, of the podcast itself, one of the things that occurred to me as I was listening to the episode, I do a lot of podcast coaching, and so we're always talking about how do you promote, how do you do this, and I'm listening to your show, and I'm like, okay, you bring up a great point first about how you can't just sit there and bag on the media because then all you're doing is promoting outrage yourself against the media. So I get that point. But
Right.
if you're trying to not become part of the problem that you're actually trying to solve in the podcast, then I'm sitting here going, how does this guy promote this podcast when your target market is everyone? Because everybody is ticked off about something. And I'm just like, who do you end up looking at and saying, this is my target market? And can you? Or is it literally just kind of like everybody?
Well, it's definitely sort of defined more by a psychographic than a demographic. So, and they are a little hard to find. Like, they don't all hang out in one place, because it is sort of, people that are curious, people that are kind of maybe looking for some uh, ways to build some resilience to all this. And sometimes, though, they don't even know they want that until they, start realizing, oh, yeah, I guess I don't want to be mad all the time. But that's a piece of it. They're angry, kind of at what's going on, and maybe kind of afraid. And they're kind of realizing, they're beginning to go down this path of seeing, oh, yeah, it's kind of both sides are doing this, and we're really mad at each other, and we maybe need to unroll that. So, so a lot of them would be something like, they're going to be in the grocery store and saying something like, well, I wish I could talk to my brother again, or my brother-in-law again, and something like that. That's sort of the psychographic that we're looking at. And yeah, and they don't necessarily hang out in one place, so it's not easy to just go into some Facebook forum and say, blam, here we go, this is where everyone I know is.
Yeah, I would think that would present challenges for promotions. So how do you go about promoting your show?
Yeah, I mean, I did pick a topic that doesn't necessarily fit in a nice little box of the kind of show you'd want to make to have a preset audience that you could just go after. But I think the problem is worthy of looking at anyway. So yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is trying to grow the show kind of the old-fashioned way. Try to produce a show that's good enough people will recommend it, right? And that's really what I'm trying to do is if I can help this person, maybe they can say, hey, this show helped me and I learned something from it, and it changed my view on this. It changed my view more about like the meta part of it. I didn't like suddenly, oh, I'm going to vote for that guy, now I'm going to vote for that guy. We're not doing that. We're not out here advocating for candidates or advocating for positions. We're just trying to uh, get the landscape so we could coexist better, and also process to make decisions about um, those issue questions, right? Things like that. Like, you can be more calm and use that part of your brain, because that's another thing, right? If you're fired up and mad, you're not making great decisions about the policy issues, right? Because you're not going to be looking at the facts. So we're looking at reality there. So yeah, so that's one of the biggest ones, is really just trying to build a show that's good enough that people will tell other people about it.
I mean, that's a great way to do it. So it's definitely the old-fashioned way, but I understand. You have to do what you have to do. In the same vein, because of how difficult finding that target market may be. Have you had a chance to try to monetize it at all? If so, how has that gone, or have you not gotten into that yet?
Yeah, well, I decided I could do this because I'm retired, and so I'm not trying to make a living out of it, but I have offered, ways for people to contribute. So at least it helps offset some of that cost, and makes me able to keep it makes it a little easier to keep doing the work.
Sure.
So in that case, the one that's been most successful for me is monetizing through Substack, where I let people offer subscriptions there. And I buy me a coffee and some of that kind of stuff as well. But the one that's had the most success for my show and the audience and also the Substack has been another place to, it seems like a place where there are that demographic does live. That psychographic, I should say, does live. So by writing on Substack, that does seem to attract people to the message we're trying to do, if not the podcast. Like, one of the you could, good and bad. Like, because I also write on Substack, I have people that just read my Substack, even people that contribute. They don't actually listen to the podcast. They never became podcast listeners, right? They just read the stuff I write. And to that point, I even have on Instagram, which I'm not a huge Instagram guy, but I have Instagram. I've had people on there go, "Oh no, I don't listen to the podcast. I just listen to the 30-second things you put out. That's all I need." It's like I got everything I want from that. Like, I used to be mad at that, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess you're following and you're sort of interested in the topic. So you got to meet people where they are, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Since we're talking about the podcasting portion of this, as we keep moving through this, I hate asking this question because I'm an old guy. I'm old school. But how do you, or do you, and if you do, how do you incorporate AI in what you do with the podcast? I know some people are interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, being a tech guy, I, I've sort of, I'm not, as a pragmatic or practical from a practical perspective, not necessarily probably for lots of people that are probably more experts than me, but sort of being a tech guy, I keep my hands in a lot of that stuff. So I do kind of, I've been watching it since day one. So yeah, I mean, I think on Substack, one thing I've kind of learned over there is people really like more authenticity. So I would avoid, sort of direct copy and pasting stuff, because they'd rather have typos and poor grammar here and there. And I mean, they'd really rather hear from real people. But that doesn't mean you can't use AI to maybe help create outlines or themes or ideas, or maybe even polish the language here and there. But try to keep it. I would say I would avoid pure copy and paste there. I do use AI for like show notes and stuff like that. That I not as to me, I'm not as critical, worried about that being like the best writing I've ever done or anything like that. So I'd be a little bit more likely to do, more cut and copy and paste without doing as much editing there. I still never like to just purely copy and paste that kind of stuff, but I will do some with the things like show notes. I'll use AI to work on titles, but it actually has kind of become my anti-hero, because usually it comes up with 7 really bad titles, but then somewhere in there's like, oh, now I have an idea, right? I just don't use any of the ones it gave, but it's like, oh, but that made me think of something I do want to say, because like, oh, that's terrible, that's terrible, that's even worse. But then I kind of, my anti-hero, I come back, oh no, this is the title I want. And I will experiment. I don't know if other people do this too, but I will experiment with old episodes from the catalog and play around with changing the titles in the RSS feed and just see if anything happens by doing that, and load them up with different keywords or whatever. And I don't know if other people experiment with that as well, but I'll do that sometimes on an older episode that I think, well, it's been a year, let's see if we can do something and maybe fire it up and get 15 more listens or who knows what, right?
I love that. And I love that description. I'm going to steal that if it's okay with you. That anti-hero. I think that's perfect. Talking about
Yeah.
AI. I really like that. All right. Excellent. Um, sorry, that was just really good. All right. So, hey, I always ask everybody a corny question about their podcast. In doing your podcast, what is it about doing your podcast that you love the most? And what is it about doing your podcast that you just absolutely hate the most?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts about it that I love. I think, actually the interviews, and prepping for the interview, and then actually having, the interview is probably the part I like the most. It's probably where That's probably the part that the audience appreciates the most as well. That's what where I'm bringing maybe my personality the most to the show is is in that dialogue, like creating a conversation with the guest, and still bringing out the actual details and stuff, the salient parts of the research or whatever it is that they're presenting, but in a way that keeps it interesting and draws it out from these sometimes kind of stoic and stiff academics, right? So sometimes trying to somehow make that a little bit more interesting and keep it rolling, keep it moving forward. So I think that's the part I like the most. I don't know. Um, at some point it would be great to probably offload some of the audio engineering part of it, because I'm not that great at it. I mean, but I'm a little bit of a perfectionist too, so I have not found any sort of simple AI ones that I really trust. I'm kind of still a perfectionist about what the waveforms look like, so I actually want to see those and see what's going on with those and listen to those. So that's probably an area where, it cost me a fair bit to do that. And but I'm good, it's not that bad. I've kind of got it down to a little bit of an art, and I kind of go into Zen mode, like click, click, cut, click, click, cut, cut, switch a thing. I kind of go into Zen mode and kind of maybe it's a little meditation period. But that's probably, and of course, I guess I don't know. There isn't that much I don't like about it because, like I say, it's so much of it is new and fresh for me that I'm still, and I have so much to learn still that so far there isn't any part that I really dread.
Nice. I can appreciate that. Usually if you do it Family Feud style, top five answers on the board. Usually it's editing, promotion on social media, things like
Right.
that. But when I'm talking to a tech guy, all bets are off because you guys just look at things a little bit differently.
Right.
You know, so I love that.
Well, that was one thing about this show when I did start it, sort of being a total tech nerd, is I made a deal with myself that I would not, go down that path of you know, sort of investigating and researching and playing with hardware and software because I'd still be doing that if I didn't make that deal, right? So I sort of said, look, we're going to find something that's adequate to start with, and that's what we're going to use. Like we're going to make the show with that stuff, and so I've held to that pretty good this whole time, right? Where I have not, because I could still be investing in hardware. I could probably be buying every possible thing you could buy, right? And I would have never produced a single episode. So I did make that deal with myself to really be, and I've been pretty hard, pretty rigid about that. Like because I could still go down that path and probably stop producing episodes and just play with hardware forever.
I love it. No, I really do. David, I appreciate everything you brought to the show today. I really, really love what you're attempting to do with your podcast and with your goals and your purpose and trying to just have civility come back into the world. So, I mean, I applaud all your efforts, man. I really do. As we kind of, pull things together here and start to wrap up, let me ask you though, you've been doing this for more than a minute. So you've overcome a few things, and you're definitely an experienced podcaster at this point. So, what's your best piece of advice for podcasters who are out there who are simply not quite where you are?
Yeah, I think uh, a a big part of it is to really, like you asked me before, like who's the audience, and that's going to evolve. Like that's a living document. Like you don't write one time, here's what my ideal listener is, and then set that away and you'll never touch it again, right? You're kind of going to reevaluate that on a regular basis. But like have that in mind and have that, you even talked about kind of the purpose and the guardrails. Like have some of that really written down somewhere and create some of those guardrails. And in everything you do, ask yourself, is this thing I'm doing serving that purpose? Like am I still doing that? Is this thing doing that? Like because sometimes you'll get, an idea and you'll say, I want to do this thing. And I'm not saying you can't go down some of these other avenues, you can't expand some of that, but just ask yourself that question. If I'm going to go a little bit down this left field thing, is it still serving that mission? Am I still doing the thing that I said I was doing, and that I want to do? And does it serve that mission? And that mission, and then think of that listener in that mission, right? So, like, it's easy to say I want to do this thing because I'm curious about it, and sometimes that's enough because your listeners like you and they're just going to go with you wherever you go. But you know, is there something for the listener in this, right? So trying to just keep circling back to what is the listener, what am I serve, how, in what way does this serve my listener, I think is a biggie. And I think I know you didn't ask for five, but the other one I'd kind of
It's
add to
okay.
that is sort of be still stay within you too, right? Like it's going to be hard to put on a show and be somebody else for 2 years or 5 years or whatever, right? You can do it for 10 episodes, but can you just do it forever? So you're probably just going to have to let your hair down at some point and kind of be who you are, and it'll be way easier to do that, so, and your audience then will either be with you or they won't, right? I mean, you're gonna, and I think that's a thing to keep thinking about this, like I talk about keeping that the audience in mind, your ideal listener in mind, a real person that you're delivering something to. Just remember that like they're they're there with you, like they're gonna go, they're gonna let you take them, they're gonna give you the benefit of the doubt. Like you don't necessarily have to spend all your time explaining what your podcast is. Let the podcast speak for itself, and they're going to be there with you to try some of these things. Like if you have some of these ideas, and they're trusting you to deliver on that message, right? And so if you kind of let them down and you stop delivering on that message, they're not going to be around anymore, right? So I think that's kind of a biggie. Just keep that listener in mind. Keep how you're, how you want to serve them, and because it's easy to become really, self-absorbed in this and just do what you want to do, and don't, and the listener's not there. They're going to, but I don't know. That's the biggest one for me is just try to keep the show focused on serving that listener in some way, and I think that'll really create a guardrail for the show that will um, really brand it and really set you apart in some way. Because whatever you're doing, whatever the topic is, nobody else is you. Nobody else is bringing what you're bringing to that topic. Even if there's, if seems like a saturated topic, nobody's you. Like nobody else is bringing what you're bringing. So, I mean, if you do that, if you serve that customer, sort of your way, I think that's probably the biggest advice that I would do, because I see a lot of podcasters sort of with a plan to make money, and my plan to make money has these 7 steps, and if I do these 7 steps I'll make money. But sort of then what, right? What are you going to be able to keep doing that? Is there a real purpose and a mission behind that, and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think that would be my biggie, is really just kind of create those guardrails and ask yourself all the time, is this serving my audience?
I love that advice. I really do. All the points were great. That last one was perfect. Serving your audience is 100%, where we have to be, and I just love that. So, great advice. Great way to wrap us up. Absolutely, positively. David Beckemeyer, appreciate you. Outrage Overload. Everybody go check that out. It's an absolutely wonderful podcast. David, thank you again for just coming in here, sharing everything you did, and for the mission that you're on, man. I hope you succeed. It'd be great to be able to have a conversation with, my sister again, about this sort of thing. So, all power to you, man. And thanks again for coming on.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing your show as well. And I will say that, as you know, Rory, us podcasters, we love hearing from people and getting feedback or even questions, right? So my contact info is easy to find at outrageoverload.net, and I do answer. I say on there I answer every email eventually, and I do. Like also any comment, question you want to ask them about podcasting, you want to ask anything else, I'm sure you're the same way. We're out here to serve each other too, right? This is a community.
100%. And all your contact information I can find will be absolutely in the show notes for everybody.
Perfect.
So if you didn't get that, folks, it'll be in the show notes. Just look down. It's right there. All right, while you're listening to this. All
Yeah,
right, David,
perfect.
thank you so much, man. It was awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Folks, it's been another awesome episode of The Podcaster Nation. The reason that we get these fantastic podcasters on here and we have these awesome conversations is because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. Folks, we showed it again today. This is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. So keep sailing.